Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be doing something that I did back in 2018, but we're going to be doing it better. So I created this and my skills have improved since then, so we're going to go ahead and create something better. So you guys have probably already seen it in the thumbnail of this video. I have no idea what I'm making yet. But yeah, let's jump straight into this. So I'm going to be using the Forester plugin for this, but you could generally go and find some trees and stuff on like CG Trader or TurboSquid or something like that that you can use if you don't have the plugin. Anyway, so I'm going to come and create a plane. This plane is going to be our floor. I'm going to make this like 3000 by 3000 and give it 400 and 400 segments. And what I'm thinking for this is this image is like slightly offset. We've got like a diagonal view with like this volumetric lighting coming through like all these god rays. I'm thinking I might put like a river down this middle section here and then have all these like trees, and then this light will be hitting the river. So let's go ahead and sort this out. I'm going to grab a displacer and put this displacer on our plane. And let's go ahead and work on the river to start off with. So a good way of adding a river, so if I come and create a layer, go into our layer, and under shader, I'm going to add a gradient. So a good way of adding a river into this sort of thing is by using a gradient with turbulence on it. So this gradient is set out that our white areas are being raised up and our black areas are being pushed down. So if I come and create another white area on the left, you can see now we have a bit of a dip. It's not very prominent, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my height up to like 100. You see what I mean? It's got a dip. Now this is how I'd create a river, but the great thing about noises is we can add a turbulence to it. So this makes it a lot less uniform. So this percentage here, you don't want to go too crazy with this. You can see as I add a little bit in, it's starting to like mess the edges up on this gradient. Going up to 100% and you really start to lose like the definition of a river. It just looks like hills and mountains. So let's stick about 20%, and we're just going to go ahead and clamp our whites down and on either side, and this creates a bit of a river going down the middle. Cool, you see what I mean? So let's find a good angle for this. So remember, we want that river off to the side slightly and all our trees in front of us. So this is looking pretty good here. I'm going to add a camera in, make this our viewport. And now we can just come and start to really change how this river looks. So this looks a bit prominent at the moment. It's a bit deep, so I'm going to reduce my height down to say 70. Maybe a bit lower, 60. And these edges I think are a little messy. Let's just reduce our turbulence to say 10%. And we've got a lot cleaner river now. So let's think about this composition. It's looking down slightly. We've got a tree on the right here. So we actually need some area on the right of our river. So going back into my camera, let's start to position this. So I'm thinking we have room for a tree here. And then some trees on this other side, and our lights should be coming down this section here. Cool, this is good. I'm going to go ahead and add a protection tag to my camera so I don't mess it up. And again, let's just go back into our river. Maybe we make this river slightly wider so we can pull our whites out. And I'm going to go ahead and add another plane. This only needs one segment either way, and again, I'm going to make its height 3000, but its width we don't need maximum because this is just going to be our river, so I'm just going to pull this out. And now we can see where our water level will be. Pull this up slightly. Cool. Looking good. So the way this is gonna be is we need trees also at the end of this so that the volumetric lighting has something to go through and create these like god rays. So this river actually needs to be slightly cut off on the end, I think. So let's go and change our gradient. Now we could change the seed of this, and some of these are actually have areas at the end that are starting to like cut in. You just got to kind of get lucky with it. So I'm just going to cycle through these a bit and find something I like the look of. So you see what I mean here? This is actually quite nice. We've got this like wide area here, and we've definitely got some areas to put some trees down here. Cool, looking good. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. Let's go ahead and add to this displacement. So the rest of this is looking very flat. We don't want too much displacement on it. This obviously was completely flat. This is why I'm redoing it, because I was just not happy with this. But this area shouldn't be flat. Let's just add some slight displacement to it. So in our shader, I'm going to add another noise. And I'm going to go into this noise and change it to my favorite one, Naki. I'm going to up the scale to like 4,000. See, now this has some bumps and displacements going on, but this is not adding to the river that we had. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my river, move the river to the top, and tell my river to overlay. And this is going to add it in. It's going to move the river down slightly, so we can go ahead and mess with our opacities here, find something we like the look of, maybe not. Maybe I just need to move my water level down now. And that's looking pretty good here. So now we have this river with all these like extra bumps in it. The ground is not as flat. We've got some like peak areas going on. Awesome, looking good. So let's go ahead and add these trees and stuff in. This is actually going to be reasonably quick. This is not a particularly hard render to do. So let's go ahead and add all these trees. Like I say, I'm going to be using the Forester plugin. I think you can find some trees and stuff on CG Trader or things like that. And you can use them in the exact same way I'm going to be using them. But we're going to be using the cloner matrix for this. So let's go ahead and grab a tree. So plug in Forester tree. And I don't think I'm going to use the same tree for this one. Let's go ahead and use something a bit different. So let's go to my tree library. And let's just have a look. Let's use this one. I don't think I've ever used this tree before. It looks kind of cool. Now here's a trick for you. The way Forester works is you can change the parameters of your tree in your viewport and your render. Redshift doesn't pick up the render levels, unfortunately. Maybe in newer versions of Forester it does, but the latest version doesn't run on R20, so I've not updated. But anyway, so we don't want to increase our viewport level, because then it increases our render times. We get a lot of polygons and geometry in our viewport, and it just starts to bog things down. But how would we get a denser tree? Like, this tree doesn't look particularly dense. It wouldn't look particularly good in a render. Well, there's a simple way of doing this, and it's a bit of a trick, right? If we go to leaves, we can actually tell our leaf size. It's here, leaf size. This is set to 1. If I increase this to 3, you can see we now have a denser looking tree without increasing any polygons. And this is because we just increased the leaf size instead of adding more leaves. And it's a bit of a trick. It can look good, and it actually looks really stylized a lot of the time, because now you get these like larger leaves that offer bigger specular areas, instead of just increasing the leaf count, which adds more specular areas instead of bigger ones, if you get the idea. So it's definitely a stylized look, and it's definitely a way to avoid larger render times. So hopefully that's a little tip for you. Anyway, back to what we were doing. So we want to go ahead and add all these trees in. So what I like to do is copy our tree and make 2 more copies of it, okay? Because we're going to be editing the materials on this. So I'm going to move these trees out slightly. So we have 3 trees. And we just want some difference between these trees. So in our Forester, I'm going to go to, say, our trunk parameters, and we can start to add like waves to these trunks. We can like get the trees to like bend over, for example. And it just adds some like difference between these. So I like to just add some... First of all, we want to change the seed on these. So we have a tree seed here. I'm just going to pick this one up, grab our 3rd one and move it down 1. So now we have 3 different trees. And then again, in our trunk parameters, maybe I just make this one bend slightly. Make this next one bend the other way slightly. And our third one can stay the same. So now these trees aren't looking completely uniform anymore. They do seem to have the same like trunks coming out of these. I've just noticed. even though I changed the seed on them, this is probably the leaf seed. So we actually want to probably change the way these trunks look. So maybe just up our trunk displacement. This just makes it a bit more like knobbly. Up it on this one here as well. And this one. Our trunk bends. This looks pretty gnarly. I mean, if you're using Forest, you can really just start to mess with this and find things you like the look of. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and make one tree slightly smaller. So under tree parameters, let's first of all judge the size of this on our render. So let's go ahead and place one. I think maybe they're a little large. If you can imagine it sat here, it's probably a little large. So I'm going to reduce our tree size to like 0.8. 0.7. Yeah, 0.7 is about the right size. Let's just move it back over here. So if this one's 0.7, we can actually go ahead and make all the other ones 0.7. We don't need different sizes because we're going to be using a random modifier to change the sizes on these. Cool. So let's add these trees in. So I'm going to grab my plane. I'm going to rename this floor to start off with. And then I'm also going to put it in a folder called old, because we're instantly going to get rid of this. Because I'm going to right click my floor and say current state to object. So now we have a floor here. I'm going to go turn off these two and hide our old one. So the reason we've made this editable is because we want to come in and select different polygons, and we can't do that without it being editable. But if we just made it editable without saying current state to object, then it would keep reverting the displacer every time we try to select our polygons. So let's go and, first of all, we're going to need a wet map for this scene. So on my selection tool, I'm going to say turn off, only select visible objects. So we're going to turn this off, and we're just going to go around and select all the edges on this this river that we have here. Because where the water touches our geometry, it's going to be a lot wetter, so the geometry is going to be darker, and we need to select the areas that this is going to be shown. So this is slightly tedious. We're just going to go around and select all these areas. And this is a good reason to have our water level also in our scene, because then when we can see just where this is going to need to be applied. Cool, so that's selected all the edges, so then we'll turn off our water, and then we have to come in and select everything inside that we have missed. Oh, let's not move it. Cool, looking good. So I'm going to come up and say select set selection, and we're going to name this selection here wet map, and then I'm going to go ahead, select it, go up to select and say invert, and this is now going to select the outside sections. And I see here I've missed a few polygons on our wet map by the looks of it, because now these polygons are here missing. So I'm going to go back in, reselect these polygons that we missed, go up to set selection and update it by saying set selection. Cool, again, select this, invert, make sure you deselect the selection up here and then go back in. And I've missed another polygon there, but we're going to ignore that one, it doesn't make a difference. And what we're going to do, so this selection here is where our trees are going to be. But at the moment our trees will be coming directly down to our water line, which we don't want. So we're just going to go around our water line and maybe just remove some selections where we don't want trees. So like, see this bank here, we wouldn't have trees growing on the bank. So we want to like find the contours of our geometry and where the flat areas are, and just remove anything that we think it wouldn't be growing on. So maybe this bank here, I wouldn't have any trees here. And we're just going to go around the whole section. We might have a tree in this middle section here, but let's just go ahead and remove some of the edges on it. Don't want any on this bank here. Again, I might have one of this middle section here, but maybe not this section here. Cool. So this is where our tree is going to go. So I'm going to come up and say set selection, and we're going to name this one trees. Cool. So let's go ahead and apply these trees now. So I'm going to come up and go MoGraph matrix. So this is a matrix vector. This is the same as a cloner, but instead of applying, recreating geometry in your viewport, it's only going to be available when you render it. So this actually keeps our viewport reasonably fast, because you can imagine cloning a tree like 300 times is going to really slow you down. But instead it's going to add all these little cubes around instead of the trees. So we're going to change this to object. We're going to drag our floor in, and then under selection we're going to drag our tree selection in. So now it's added all these little cubes around. These are where our trees are going to be. So let's jump into our viewport, set my camera. Okay, so we have no trees at the moment, and that's because we need to tell it, Redshift, what to clone onto these little cubes via particles. So we're going to right click our matrix and add a Redshift tag, Redshift object tag, and under particles we're going to change our mode from disabled to custom objects, and we're just going to go ahead and drag all three of our trees in. So these trees are aligning to our geometry at the moment. So example is this geometry is slightly tilted here, so our tree is tilted to match it. But trees all grow upwards. You're not going to have trees on their side randomly. So we're going to turn off align clones, and this is just going to fix our trees. Cool. So this is definitely not enough trees. I'm going to increase this count to like 500, and we can start to see what's going on. So if we look where our camera is, then go back to our tree selection, you can see we have selections in front of our camera, and this is creating a bit of a block here. We're getting random trees. So I'm actually going to turn this down slightly, 300. Maybe that fixes it. We still might get unlucky. Yep, we're getting unlucky. Absolutely fine. All we're going to do is go back into our tree selection and just remove all this geometry that's in front of our camera, and go up to select and set selection while you have this selection selected. Don't want to say selection any more times, and just say set selection one more time, and it will update it. Cool, and then we update our IPR, and you can see we're still getting trees in front there. I wonder if it's this section here. It might be this section here that we're getting the trees. So let's just update this one. Yep, perfect, that was it. So this is actually pretty good. I'm imagining our light coming through these trees at the back here. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. So a few things to note. We can go ahead and change our seed if we don't like the position of our trees. So let's just change our seed around. Even if you think you like something, there may be something better. That's actually quite nice. Yeah, I'm actually liking that. I might go ahead and add the trees at the end manually, because I actually quite like this seed here. So let's keep it like this for now. Awesome. Quickly save it. Dope. So we have our trees in, and something to note, if you look here, where our trees are slightly going over geometry that's like a hill or something, our trees are not being pushed into the ground. So we're going to go ahead and do this. So if I turn my IPR on, and we're just going to go ahead and select this tree here that I think is wrong, or C is wrong, and we can go into transform, and these parameters here, we can move them. So our Y is controlling our up and down. So I might just move this like -2, -4. Oh, how high is this tree? There you go. You can see it's intersecting into the ground now. So it's actually -20. And this is actually going to affect all the other trees. So you have to be careful about this. Just move them all down slightly. But I do like how this one is now looking on the edge here. and it just makes sure they're all like actually in the ground. They're all seated in the ground. Cool. Let's frame all again. Awesome. Let's carry on. So what do we need next? We need some grass and we need some rocks, and we need our water level back. There it is. There's our water level. So let's go ahead and add some grass. So I'm going to come up to Forester again, grab a plugin, and we're going to grab Multiflora, which is our grass. And I like to copy this as well. So let's first of all group this. So we're grouping this and we're going to name this trees. This is our tree cloner. And our Multiflora, I'm going to create 2 grasses for this. So I'd like to create a long grass and copy this. And I like to create a shorter grass as well. So let's just go wild grass patch. This is a slightly shorter one. Cool. So we have 2 bits of grass here. We can go ahead and move them out of the scene. And these are over here. Cool. So you see we have one slightly longer and one slightly shorter. And we're going to go ahead and create another matrix cloner. And we'll group these and call this grass. And now I like to group these 2 sections and call these cloner. Cool. Just keeping this hierarchy nice and clean. So then again, let's go ahead and we didn't add our random effector to our trees. I actually missed something. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. So you see we have our trees. We're going to go ahead and select this matrix cloner here, go up to MoGraph, effector, and then random. And I'm going to drag this into our tree folder here. And what this has done is, all it's done at the moment is move the positions randomly, which we don't want. But we could affect it slightly. Because we've moved all our trees down -20, we could actually affect some of the heights as long as the ones that are in viewport are still in the ground. So if I change our Y position here to say 5, it's going to move some of them up and some of them down, and making sure this one here that we had an issue with is still in the ground. That's absolutely perfect. Our scale, we can get a random scale on this. I'm going to turn uniform and absolute on, and I'll just change this to -0.5. -0.5. It's too small. Just turn off absolute. -0.1. And if I turn this off and on, you can see it's just changing the scale of some of them, so they're all the same height now, or width, or it's an absolute scale, so it's the whole scale of them. And we're going to go ahead and change our rotation. So we just want our X rotation. So I'm going to change this to 360. So they're now not all facing the same direction, so they don't look as uniform. Cool, awesome, looking good. So let's go ahead and do this to our grass now as well. So we have our matrix cloner here for our grass. We're going to change this to object, and we're going to go ahead and drag our floor in, and we can use the same selection for our trees, because we're going to have grass in roughly the same areas. And then again, we have to add a Redshift object tag to this and drag our trees in as custom objects. And now we should have, you can see it's added some grass around, but at the moment they're actually, because we're using the same seed on our matrix probably, and we don't have that many, it's probably spawned them in the trees. So let's go ahead and increase our count to like 700. You can see now we get some foliage around. Let's go 1,500. We want a lot more grass. Oh, way more, 2,500. Yep, I actually really like the look of that. We don't want too many because we want the ones that are here to stand out. And again, we have the same issue, it's aligning clones. So let's turn off align clones. So now all this grass is now pointing roughly upwards. And as well, I'm going to go ahead and move this into the ground, so like -5. Cool. We're probably going to have to come back and change this later once we texture the floor slightly. But yeah, and grass, we can add a random effector to it as well. And again, we only want to change the scale, say -0.1, and rotation, our X rotation to 360, and this is looking pretty good. Cool. So let's go ahead and add one last thing to this. We're going to add some rocks in. So I actually have all these like rocks laying about. They look kind of naff in this one, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. So let's go ahead and go up to our plugins, Forester rock, and move this rock off to the side. We're creating a bit of a library of assets over here. And this rock is huge. So in our rock parameters, we're going to change our rock size way down to like 0.1. And I'm going to go ahead and reduce my subdivisions on this. And I like to have like quite pointy rocks. I'm going to go ahead and copy this rock 2 more times and move them to the side. So one here and one here. And we're going to just go ahead and change the seed on 2 of these rocks. So now they're not exactly the same as each other. And I might make them a bit smaller, so 0.05, 0.08. And let's make this one, let's just keep this one at 0.1. So we've got different size rocks that look slightly different. And let's group these, put them inside our cloner group, name this rocks, and create another matrix cloner. Cool. So we again add a Redshift tag to this, tell this to custom objects and drag all 3 of our rocks in there. And our matrix can be object, and we're going to drag our floor in again, you get the idea. But I don't think we need a selection for it this time because we want to apply these rocks everywhere. And as well, having align clones on is not as issue with these rocks. So let's go ahead and just have a look at this. So you can see it's applying these rocks in slightly different places. And these rocks don't actually have textures at the moment. You have to apply materials to the rocks separately because you can actually add your own materials to rock. But I'm going to use these ones, so I'm going to say apply this and then just copy to the other 2. And I'm going to turn off my water slightly because I want to see where the rocks are in the water this time. So we're going to go ahead and up our count to like 500. It's going to add a load of rocks in. Let's say 600. Cool. I actually really like that we have quite a lot of rocks in the water here. So let's go ahead and add a effector to this, a random effector. And we don't want position. We just want scale and rotation. So we don't even need absolute scale on this because we want this to be quite random. So maybe I'll just put like 0.5 on each of these. So now it's changing like the parameters separately. And our rotations, and add 360 to all 3 of these. So now it's rotating them all randomly. So we get these like rocks pointing out of the floor. Awesome, looking good. Now you can choose whether you want to align the clones or not. If I turn it off, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Having a random effect on this is moving them all around quite a lot. So having align clones on doesn't even matter. And again, change your seed, find something you like the look of. I find it quite nice to have like a section of rocks here that's very prominent because these ones draw the eye and the other ones are less prominent. Actually, this one here is quite nice being stuck up. I think if I lowered my camera slightly, let's go ahead and lower my camera. If I lowered my camera just so it's picking up this rock a bit more. Like this. Yeah, this is good. Cool. So we have all 3 elements in here now. We have trees, grass, and rocks. Let's just go ahead and start texturing this. So we want some textures. So let's jump over to Polyhaven for some 4K textures. I'll leave a link in the description below, but you can also check out, I recently did a video on 5 free texture libraries, so feel free to check that out. Anyway, let's jump to Polyhaven and let's find a nice texture for our floor. So I actually want to go ahead and grab 2 textures here. So we want to grab one texture for the general like floor where the foliage is, maybe some like rocks. I mean, this is actually quite nice here. I think this would be quite nice. But we also want to grab a texture for our water, and this water wants no like green foliage on it. It wants maybe like roots, some like rocks and stuff, maybe things like this. This can be used for our water. and we're just going to make it shinier and darker so it has a wet map. So let's go ahead and pick one. So I'm going to go ahead and use forest leaves. This is quite nice. So forest leaves 2, this is the first one I'm going to use. So you're at the top right, you can click here and choose where you're downloading it for and what resolution you're downloading it. So just hit download, and I'm going to download that. And let's go ahead and grab one for our river. So we don't want any like green foliage on this one. We just want so maybe just like rock. So this rock ground 2 here looks quite nice. Rock ground 5. I think we're going to go with this one here. Yeah, this one's quite nice. So rock ground 2, if you want to search for it, this is the one I'm going to use, and I'm going to go ahead and download this one as well. So I have our 2 textures here. Let's go ahead and start with our forest leaves. So it's going to our textures, and it's going to give you a few textures to work with. So we've got a roughness map here, a normal map, normal gloss. So this is more like a bump map here. And then we have our displacement map and our diffuse color. So let's go ahead and create a new Redshift material. These materials that we all have here are for our foliage and our trees and stuff. We're going to come back to them slightly later because we are going to edit them. We're not going to have the normal colors that we have here. But for now, let's just get our floor going. So I'm going to create a Redshift material, rename this floor, and go back to our leaves. I'm going to drag all 4 of these textures in. Say no to all of these. It's just asking whether you want to place them in your file location. And I'm going to go ahead and drag our material onto my floor. And I'm also going to quickly come and grab a dome light, just a standard dome light. This is just going to add some lighting into this so we can start to see how this is going to look. Cool. So this is our scene so far. I'm going to frame all, and I'm going to highlight just this bottom section here where I know we're going to have some of this material. Very good. So in our floor, I'm going to start adding some of these textures. So this is a roughness map here. So this can go into my material under reflection, roughness. Our next up is our normal map. So this is our bump map. So we want to come up and create a bump node. Bump map. I'm going to put this into overall bump map and put this material into our bump node. And because it's a normal map and not a general bump map, we have to make sure we change our height field to tangent space normals. Cool. You can see we already have some awesome bump mapping going on here. And then next we have our displacement map. We'll move that to the side for the section, for the moment, sorry. And we have our diffuse color here. And we're going to go ahead and put this in a color correct. I always do this with my diffuse colors because it's a very easy way for us to edit how this color looks. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in my diffuse color. Cool. So now we need to see how this is going to be mapping onto our objects. So I'm going to quickly wait for this to update, and you can see it's mapped here and it looks pretty awful. And this is because it's probably either too big or it's not mapping it properly. So let's go ahead and find our floor. This is our floor here. And under our floor, we can change our projection mapping from UVW to cubic. And this is going to map a lot better, I think. This looks a lot better. Now, we want to also create a displacement map for this. Let's grab a displacement node. Put this into our output under displacement. Grab our displacement map that we have here and put this into our displacement node. And this is not going to change anything just yet because we need to come to our floor, right click and say Redshift object. And then under our geometry, we need to override and add tessellation and displacement. So options we have here, smooth subdivisions we're going to turn off. We like to have some hard like lines and geometry in this, not having things rounded out completely. Our maximum subdivisions, I'm going to increase to 10 so we get some real detail in this. And then under our maximum displacement and displacement scale, I'm going to increase our displacement scale to 10, and this is going to control our bump mapping a lot. So you can see now we probably gain some bump mapping in this, and then our displacement, maximum displacement is the height of this displacement. So we're going to also increase this to like 5. And we can start to see what's happening. Nice, it's moved some of it up. It's not quite right. Let's have a look around. So I think we could probably do a little bit more to this. You can start to see the difference. So if I turn this off, you can see what's raising up and what's not. So we are getting some displacement here. I may just increase the height slightly to like 8. And then increase our displacement scale to 15. Cool, looking good. And now you have to come around and make sure that this has not messed up any of the trees that we've added in, because it's increased the height of our plane, so it may have moved our plane up slightly. This is the most prominent when we add our water layer back in. So where's our water layer here? Let's go ahead and name this water. So this is our water layer that we had earlier, remember? And you can see now our water layer is actually further down than it was before. So we have to actually go in and move our water layer up slightly. So let's go ahead and add the material that's going to be underneath our water. And we're going to do this through our water mapping. So remember earlier we created a selection tag called wet map. And this is how we're going to add this, but we need to turn this into a vertex map. So go into our selection, make sure we have our water map selected. I'm going to go create, or select, sorry, and say set vertex weight, and make sure this is 100%, and say OK. And what this basically creates is this selection here, but it's actually kind of faded out on these edges. So it's not as prominent. It's not going to be following the polygons perfectly. You can imagine if you just applied your wet map using your selection tag, you're going to have like square edges where the material just cuts off. This actually fades a lot of this out. Cool. So we need to create a wet map. So we're going to go ahead and go back into our material. And then let's move some things around. So this is one material here. Just condense this slightly. This is our displacement map. We can move this out the way. I like to move this down here. And then move our output away. And we're going to grab a material blender. And we're going to put our base material into our material blender as base material. And then our material blender to our output. Cool. So our second material, we're going to go and find the second material that we downloaded. So this is our rock floors under textures. And we're just going to go ahead and drag all of this in. Now we don't actually need the displacement map for this. We're not going to be using the displacement map. You could theoretically add it as a second complete texture, but I'm just going to keep this as one texture for now. Cool. So these are the 4 materials we have. We don't need our height map, which is actually our displacement map, so we're going to delete that. We just want our normals, roughness, and color. And we're going to copy our material here and apply these new textures to our material. So our texture, remember, goes in our diffuse, but we're going to go ahead and grab a color correct. And this one is more important for this because we're going to be making this wetter. So this can go in, this is our diffuse color. And then our normal map is our bump map, remember. So we're going to copy our bump map here. Make sure it's tangent space normal because it's a normal map. And the roughness map you can use or not. See, the thing with wet mapping, right, is you want it to be shinier because it's been affected by water. And water generally makes things like slick and shiny when it comes into contact with it. Our roughness map here is going to be telling it how shiny to be. But if, say, we ignore this roughness map and don't use it, then we could come in and set our own roughness here and make this like quite shiny, like 0.2, and then we have quite a shiny material. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete my roughness map. We're not going to use that. So awesome. Coming up and put this into our layer color 1. So I'm going to come up and create a vertex map. And in our vertex map, we're going to drag this little tag that we created here earlier called vertex map. We're going to drag this in, and we have to check, putting this to our output, we have to check where our water level is. Because our displacement on our material has now moved our geometry slightly, we need to check that our water level is still correct. So looking at this, you can now see our water level is a little low in places. So we're going to have to come in and recorrect our vertex map. So to do this, I'm going to go grab our wet map we had earlier, and we need to cross like section or cross like check between this image and this image here, whereabouts our areas are a little low. So this actually looks pretty good apart from these two areas here, and on just left of this are slightly wrong. So looking where this is and then where this is on my actual geometry, I can go in and just select these new areas. So I'm just going to go ahead and raise it slightly here, and I think the area it's missing is along this bank here, so it's slightly here as well. So just going to go ahead and raise this. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and on my wet map say select and set selection. This updates my map, and we're going to go ahead and delete the old vertex map, go to my wet map and select and create a new one quickly. Cool, so we have a new wet map. Go back into our floor. On this vertex map, we're going to drag our wet map in, go back in and have a look at this now. And you can see it's actually updated it, it's raised it on this section here a lot better than it was before. So then this vertex map can be applied to our layer blend color 1, and this is going to tell our rocky material to apply where our vertex map is. So you can see here, if I highlight this, just this section here, we now have this like rocky, we have this grass and it actually fades into our rocky material. But this doesn't look particularly wet, right? If it was wet, it'd be a lot darker because it would be soaking up the moisture. So this is why we have the color correct that we added earlier. So under our gamma, we can go ahead and reduce our gamma to like say 0.7, and you can see it makes a darker material here. And maybe I'll up the contrast to like 0.7 as well. And here now you can see if I go around, we have this dark wet material that's leading into our water. Awesome, very good. So this is all set up. Let's go ahead and start changing some of our tree materials now. So this is where you can start to really think about what sort of composition you want to go for. So the image we had before, if I go back over to my Instagram, was all purple. I'm thinking we might go like something a bit of a different color here. I recently did a sunset scene that was quite nice. That was like purples and pinks and stuff. That was quite nice. But I'm thinking about what sort of sky we're going to have. So if I'm going like a nighttime, like God rays, sort of like volumetric lighting coming through, maybe I go like a sci-fi like blue. That'd be quite nice. So what we're going to go ahead and do is edit our tree materials. So let's start off with our trunk. Our trunk doesn't actually need to change color. And starting off, you can see our materials are actually all Cinema 4D materials. Okay, so we actually need to figure out which materials we don't want. These materials here that's added, we actually don't need. I don't know why they've applied them, but we're going to go ahead and select all our materials, go Redshift materials, tools, and say convert and replace materials. And this is going to change them all into Redshift materials. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's go ahead and work on our trunk. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my trunk here and turn on my IPR. And the issue with the trunk is it has no bump mapping to start off with, so it's losing a lot of like detail that we have on this. And Forester doesn't actually have bump maps to do with their bark, but we can go ahead and create some ourselves. So if we create a ramp, we can actually pull this material into our ramp to turn it to a grayscale color. See, this now turns this ramp to grayscale, and we can go ahead and start to pull up our whites and lower our blacks, and you can see we can start to create a bit of a bump map out of this. So then if I add a bump node and put our ramp into our bump node, and then this into our material, and then material to the output, you can see it's actually gained some bump mapping now, which looks a lot better. We also don't have any displacement on it, but adding displacement to these trees can be a bit annoying, and I don't think you'll really notice. Let's just keep it to bump mapping for now. So the two extra things we're going to go ahead and do to this is grab a color correct, and put this color correct our diffuse in there and put this to diffuse to our output. And I'm going to go ahead and grab our diffuse color and put this in as my reflection color as well. Cool. So right now our tree has no reflection. By default, it doesn't add reflections to this. So we're going to up our weight. So now it has some reflections, and we're going to make this really rough. The trees are quite rough, so like a 0.8. Awesome, looking better already. So now, why do we add the color corrector in here? It's because we have 3 different trees, right? So we're going to go ahead and make 3 different materials. So this is trunk. So if I copy this 2 more times, we have trunk 1 and trunk 2, right? Well, trunk 2 and trunk 3. And just what I like to do to add some difference to this is I'm going to go ahead and change the gamma on trunk 2 to 0.9. And the gamma on trunk 3 to 1.1. So this is just either side of our base trunk color. And it's really subtle, but then we're going to go ahead and apply trunk 2 to our first tree, and then trunk 3 to our next tree. So then all 3 of these trees have slightly different colored trunks. So just spread them out slightly. You can see these ones are slightly darker here. Probably if I go have a look over here, you can see some are slightly darker than others now. And this just adds some difference between them. Awesome, looking good. So now we need to do the same with the leaves. So let's go ahead and grab a section for the leaves. Let's save this quickly before anything crashes. So we have our leaf color here. And this has the same issues that our trunk had. So let's first of all grab our color correct and put our color correct into our input and put this to our diffuse color. So now the leaves you can add some bump maps to. These materials are do have like higher speculars, so it is possible to add a slight bump map to it. So let's grab a ramp again. But if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. It's very, very subtle. It's the sort of thing, unless you're doing really close-ups, you won't actually see it. Let's grab our ramp, put our ramp in there, put our output, and see if I can show you. It's really subtle. Trying to find the specular height on these. It's quite hard. Like, it's really there. It's about there. See, you see, it does have like a slight bump in these leaves. Let's just go ahead and add this. It's very subtle though. Cool. So our color correct here that we've got affecting the diffuse color, we're going to actually put this to our reflection color as well. And the reason for this, once we add some reflections, it's getting up our weight to 1. And our roughness, leaves are reasonably like shiny, so like 0.2. And I also like to add some transmission to this. Leaves are slightly see-through, as in they let some light through them. So I like to just add a small amount, like 0.1. And you can see now they're letting some of the light through. It's maybe a little high, and you can make your render quite messy by doing this. So 0.05 I'm going to go with. And now these leaves are letting a little bit of light through them. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So what color do we want these? Let's go ahead and mess with our hue shift. So if we change the hue shift on our material here, you can see we now have different colors. So this is a pretty awesome blue that we have here. I actually quite like this. So we're going to stick with this, and then again I'm going to come down and copy my leaf 2 more times. We have 2 more trees, and this is going to be leaf 2 and leaf 3 and leaf 2. I'm just going to again offset my hue shift. So say leaf 1 is 88, okay, so leaf 2 can be 80, and then leaf 3 can be, what's 8 plus 88 plus 8, 96. That can be 96. And then we're just going to go ahead and apply these to the different trees. And then hopefully this shows when I render this. They're all slightly different colors, you see? Like this tree here is definitely a different color than this tree here, and so on and so forth. I mean, you could really go over the top here. Like if I have leaf 1 and leaf 2 like a blue and a turquoise, leaf 3 could be definitely like more of a purple. We could get a random like different highlight here, you see? I don't quite like that. Let's turn that down slightly. Or do I have it as 96? Let's go 100. Let's just try and offset it slightly a bit more than we usually would. Cool, yeah, that's looking good. I like the look of this. Cool, cool, cool. So, next we're going to do the exact same thing with our grass. So we have our grass material here. Let's go ahead and highlight our grass. And remember, we only have 2 different grass this time. So grab a color correct and put our diffuse. You can see this is just like repeating the same steps again and again. We're gonna use this for our. Do we want the grass a different color? I think I might leave the grass like green. What color did I make the grass in this one? I actually made the grass purple as well in this, so let's go ahead and make it slightly blue as well. So about 86 we were saying, right? Make some blue grass. And we might just go ahead and change the gamma on this to make a different material. So I'm going to put this in as my reflection color as well. And then up eye reflection. Grass is reasonably shiny as well, so like 0.2. And again, grass can also let a little bit of light through it, so 0.05. Awesome. So we've got grass 1 here. Name is grass. And then I'm going to copy this to grass 2. And grass 2, we're just going to up our gamma to like 1.2 and apply this to our second grass. So now some of this grass is slightly lighter than the rest of it. Cool. So this is really starting to come together, and you can imagine what we're going to do next. We're going to do the exact same thing with our rocks. So, color correct. Now we've got rock 1. I'm going to leave the rocks roughly the same color, and we're going to go ahead and highlight a rock if we can find one. There was a rock right at the front, right? So we've got a rock down here, and now we can have a look at what the bump map's doing for this rock. So these rocks don't have bump maps, but you'd expect them to be like rough and like maybe a little like stipply, if that makes sense. So we're actually going to go ahead and grab a noise. And I'm going to put this noise into my material. And it's way too big, so under our coordinates, under overall scale, I'm going to change this to like 1. It's too small. 2. It's about right. Let's grab a ramp. And we just want this rock bump map to look like it's got a little bit of like raised areas on it. So we're going to crank our blacks down. See what I mean? Crank our whites up. I actually think this is still a little big, so 3. Yeah, that's about right. And then we grab a bump map. Put this into our bump map. And put this as our bump. And we're going to turn the bump slightly down to 0.5. Cool. Now we're going to use our diffuse as our reflection color as well. And now we have 3 different rocks, correct? So we have rock 1, let's name this rock, and copy it 2 more times. So then we have rock 2 and rock 3. So rock 2, I'm going to go ahead, same as the others, reduce our gamma to say 0.8. And rock 3, I'm going to increase our gamma to like 1.2. So now all these rocks are slightly different, and all we have to do is go apply these rocks, these materials to our rocks. Cool. And things are really starting to come together now. So now we just need to work on some lighting and some render settings. Also, we're missing our water. So let's go ahead and look at our water. So I'm going to create another material, apply this material to my water, and let's jump in. So we can use a preset for this. Let's go presets and then water. And there's a few things we can change on this. So this is already looking pretty cool. Let's go ahead and highlight our water. And then frame region. So this is what we have here. We see it's shining through. It's also very, very shiny at the moment. So I'm going to reduce our roughness or increase our roughness to 0.125. And this is a very good number. I like using this number because it just kind of like blurs some of these reflections out. It starts to look really nice. So what can we do with this water? I'm going to change our IOR to 1.7. And this is basically our like transmission rate, our reflection rate. And you can see now some of these areas have like refractions in them. So it's not like letting light through directly. This rate is basically telling the angle at which the light transmits through it. So this is how we get like these slightly like shiny areas. Cool, looking good. I'm actually pretty happy with this. The light is going to affect this very differently. So I think what we want to do to this now is we need to add our lights in and make sure that we have an alpha channel so that we can add a sky in post. But we can see behind some of these trees here, you can actually see the background. And if we add an environment into this, we're going to be able to blur this background out. So let's go ahead and add our light in. So, sort our scene out. We can go ahead and delete our dome that we had earlier. Make sure our floor's correct. So let's go ahead and add a spotlight, I think. So spotlight. And the way I like to use a spotlight is by creating another cube. So we've got a cube here. You can see. I'm going to change my display to constant shading so that the redshift light doesn't affect it. So what I like to do is grab a cube, make this cube smaller, and just place it where I think I want our spotlight pointing towards. Because then we can grab our spotlight, right click and say target, and then drag this cube in. And we can actually hide this cube and it won't make any difference. The spotlight will still point towards it. So you see what I mean when I pull my spotlight up, it's obviously pointing towards this cube, and then we can grab our cube down here and say I move it. You can see in the top left my spotlight is following this cube. So it's just a really easy way of using spotlights. So let's turn our IPR on. So we're going to see nothing because I reckon it's quite dark. Yep. So our spotlight is very dark at the moment. So we can actually grab this little like point that we can grab here, and this is going to change our intensity. So now the spotlight's pointing down, and this kind of looks like the sun actually, the moon actually. But I'm going to go ahead and lower it so that it's pointing through this back section here, and maybe just like move it off to the side slightly so it's behind like this tree. Maybe not. Let's move it back and move it up slightly. And we can go ahead and move our cube on this side. Maybe move our light angle. I do want it roughly pointed towards the camera though. So that's looking good there. And then let's go ahead and add a environment. So Redshift, environment, and we want to tell our spotlight to affect our environment. So under volume, I'm going to change our contribution scale up to 1. And this is going to be like in crazy bright. This is going to make no sense to start off with. Under our environment, I'm going to change our scatter to 0.001. Okay, so we have some really hard shadows here. We have a light coming through, and this is actually really cool. I actually like the look of this already. But it's actually blocking out a lot of our scene. So we can first of all start to move where the spotlight is shining through. So we want some nice God rays, but we don't want it to be like crazy bright. So this is really nice. I'm liking the look of this. You can see we have these God rays like here and like in our bottom right here. So really, really cool. So this spotlight that we have is looking good, and we're going to go ahead and increase our samples to 2048. There's a good reason for this number, and you should maybe Google this number and look up about it. But it's like it likes to have samples in an even number, and 1024 is like the starting good amount, and then you double it every time. So if I wanted to add more samples to this, I'd just double this to 4096. So yeah, looking good. And we can go ahead and change our color. So this is a blue scene, right? So we're going to go ahead and make this like a blue color. We could even go temperature, and the higher the temperature, the colder it's going to be. So we get this like nice blue color. This is looking really cool. But you're thinking, Matt, we've lost all the detail that we had. Bear with me, we'll get to that in a second. Let's just fix a few things. So this is looking good. So what we're going to do is use a dome light as basically a GI, okay? So if you add a normal dome light in that has no HDR, it's basically going to highlight the whole scene. So if we go ahead and add a dome light, it's going to illuminate the whole scene, correct? So now we can see everything again. But that's a lot brighter than we actually want. So let's go ahead and just reduce our exposure to say 0. Let's go -3. And you can see now we're starting to pick up a lot of these silhouettes again. And this is actually darker than it would be in the final render. My PC is just having a hard time processing it, and I'm going to add some samples to this as well. Cool. And you could also add a HDR to this. If you have Polyhaven, they have HDRs on here. You can find some you like the look of. For me, I'm going to go ahead and turn my spotlight off for now and just work on this dome light. So this is what our dome light's looking like. I'm actually going to add my HDRI link. This is by Grayscale Gorilla, and it adds a library that you can just search through some HDRs, and they have some cool ones in here. I'm going to go like I want something that's a little dark. This is quite good. So that's like a nighttime HDR. Awesome. It's a little dark now. -1. So now we have like these specular highlights that are being picked up by our HDR. Remember, we have to turn off the background. We don't want the background on this. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my spotlight back on. And what I'm actually going to go do is turn off my specular on my spotlight. I only want it to affect my diffuse color at the moment. And then turn our environment back on. And this is coming out really bright. So this is looking pretty cool. And it's really hard for me to tell what this is going to render like because my PC's having a hard time with the volumetric lighting. But I think we're pretty much ready to render this. So I'm going to show you a few things to do with this first of all. So let's go to our render settings, and then I'll do a test render and then probably come back and show you what you might not want to change. So I have my width and height set up for Instagram here. And under Redshift settings, I've increased my min and max samples from 128 to 56. My GI, I just have a brute force sat here. You could also add a iridescent point clouds to get more GI bounces, which will light your scene up a bit better. But it does also increase render times, so just have a think about that. And then under our maximum trace depths, fractions, I'm going to up this to like 3. Let's go 3. And under our basic sample overrides, I'm going to go ahead and change our reflections and give it 200 samples, and our refractions 200 samples as well. So this is basically going to affect all our materials and just try and clean things up a bit. Awesome, looking good. Make sure I added some samples to my dome light. And we'd also go ahead and tint this dome light like the blue color that we had for this light here. Awesome, looking good. I think we're pretty much ready. I'm going to go ahead and render this out, and I'll be back hopefully soon. Maybe tomorrow if it takes that long. So I went ahead and did some lower resolution test renders 540 by 540 to see what's going on, and there's definitely some things that need cleaning up on this render. So this is test render number 1, and this is test render number 2 once I did some of the changes but not all of them. So let's run through them. I have 6 things that we need to do. So number 1 is the phase. So the phase in our environment, if you come into your environment you find phase here, this controls how close or far away the volumetric lighting is compared to the camera. And by reducing this phase, it pushes it further away, and we actually gain the detail back in the background of the trees. So I actually reduced this to -0.6. But this also dimmed our God rays, so to counteract this I went into my spotlight and increased my exposure to 1. This scene was also looking a little dark in general, so in my dome light I went ahead and increased my exposure there as well, just up to 1. Now my water was looking a little flat, so I went and added a displacement map to my water, and this has a height of 10, and it's just a simple noise texture with a global scale of 1000. I also went and added a bump map to this. So this is like a simple ripple bump map that I found on Google, and I went ahead and mapped this and found a scale that I like. So this is what it looks like actually on my water before I apply it to the bump mapping. So this is what my mapping looks like. So that's just going to add some detail to this. Likewise, I went ahead and changed my specular on my water. If you see in image number 1, we have like a white specular on the water here. I went ahead and made this like a pastel blue. It's just a bit more stylized and softens it out a bit. I really like this. So just changing the reflection color on my water here. Right, number 4, I went and added a little boat into this. You can see my little boat here. Now, what's the reason for doing this? The reason for doing this is it adds some scale to my scene. So beforehand, I had no idea of how big or small this river was. Say you had a human stood in the river and the human was quite large, you'd compare the trees to the human and you'd get a sense of scale for the scene. So by putting this little boat in here, it actually tells everyone that these trees are quite grand and this river is actually quite large. So you can go ahead and do this if you want. If not, it's completely up to you. Second thing I added as far as geometry goes is you can see I added a wall around here. If I go ahead and change my scene, this is just a simple cube, and I've gone ahead and made it editable and just deleted two of the sides, so then it's like outlining my scene. And the reason for this is, if we go back to our original image, you can see in the background here, some of these trees are picking up the light from our dome on the other side. And I don't want this. I want my forest to look like it's getting darker the further it goes in. So this wall is actually blocking out all the light from the other side. If I go ahead and zoom in, these trees are no longer picking up the light on the other side of our dome light. Cool. One thing you may want to do with this scene as well is add some post effects. So this little cog in the top right, you can click this and add some post effects. So I've gone ahead and added bloom and streak. There's a little enable button here at the top to enable it, and you can see what this is doing. This is adding some streaks and bloom and glow to my scene. So let's go to the bloom section. You can control this with the little threshold here. The lower the threshold, the more it's going to pick it up. So if you see I move this little slider here, it's going to change it. Cool. And you can go ahead and change the tint and stuff and go ahead and add a streak as well. The streak is like making these little like rays come off our light in the background. Just make sure you have post effects turned on in your render settings. It's here under Redshift post effects. Cool. Final last thing before we render this, and this is super important, we need to turn on alpha textures so that we get a transparent background. But there's actually some issues with this, and this is why this is really important. So first of all, let's turn on alpha channels. In our render settings, under save, make sure you have alpha channel turned on and make sure the format is PNG. So this supports alpha channels. So this is going to give us a transparent background. But the second thing that's detrimental about this is in our environment, there's actually a tick box here that says replace alpha channels. Now, if you have this turned off, it's actually going to give you the transparent background, but you lose all the God rays that would be where the transparent background is. But if you turn it on, then you get the God rays, but then you have no transparent background. It just gives you a black background. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, and we're going to set up an AOV or multipass to render out our volumetric God rays separately so that we can go ahead and add this in post. So to do this, go up to your render settings, go Redshift, and under AOVs you want to make sure it's enabled, and then under quick add we're just going to go to our drop down box and you're looking for volumetric lighting. It's right at the bottom. Now under this AOV you want to make sure we have a few things on. So under multipass output we want to enable. Under direct output I'm going to turn this on, make sure my data type is set to RGB, and my format I'm actually going to change this to JPEG and make sure my JPEG quality is 100. The reason I'm making this JPEG and not PNG is so that I can guarantee it doesn't have a transparent background. Cool, so when we render this out, we'll gain a main image and a volume pass as well. I can go ahead and show you what the volume pass is going to look like. So this is actually what the second image that you'll get, and we can use this to add our volumetric lighting back into our scene when we jump into Photoshop. Cool, I will see you there. So here I am in Photoshop with the two renders that I mentioned. We have a volume pass on the left, and we have my final render on the right. So I'm going to show you what I do to this image, but I'm going to skip through reasonably quickly because I'm trying to fit it in the video. But you can take a lot more care, and I'll probably edit it off screen for the final image as well. So we have our volume pass in here, and what a volume pass looks like is this, obviously. But you can change this to screen, and it's going to overlay on top by removing all the black areas. And you can go ahead and reduce the opacity to really control how bright your volumetric lighting is. But I was actually really happy with how it looked in Cinema, so instead I'm just going to drag it below my final image, and it's just going to add our volumetric lighting back into the sky that we lost due to it being a PNG alpha channel. Cool. So first thing to do with this, I think, is color correct. So coming into my brightness and contrast, and I actually think if I up my contrast to like 100 and then my brightness to maybe like 60, yeah, we get this like crazy looking like high contrast image. I really like the look of this. So the next order of business is just to go down the list on our color corrects. So our levels you may want to change, just some tweaking, this affecting the light a lot. I'm actually going to, because this is so bright at the moment, I'm going to not have any levels in here. Our vibrance, I'm just going to add a little bit of vibrance, so maybe like 15, just a tiny subtle bit. Our hue and saturation, you can go ahead and change the color of this if you want. I actually quite like the blue. I might make it a little bit more purple by just increasing it slightly. You can even go black and white if you really wanted to. Anyway, reduce that back down. Our color balance, you can start to add some like heat into this now. So we have our blues in this, but we could subtly start to add some reds in and make this a little warmer. So maybe if I up our reds by like 5, turn our greens purple a little bit, and it makes it a bit warmer again. Or we go the other way, it looks a bit more like metallic. I'm actually going to go -5, add some little purples in, and again blues and yellows. Add blue, take some blue away. I might just add a bit of blue. Let's make it actually quite blue. Cool, really like the look of this. And then I think what we're going to add is the sky next. So let's hop over to Google and find some night sky. So if I type in night sky, and at the top under tools, make sure you say size large, and you're going to search for only high resolution images. And you can go ahead and find something like the look of. I've actually already done this and I've saved something. So I'm going to add my sky in, and I'm going to go ahead and place this right at the bottom below my volumetric lighting, and make sure my volumetric lighting is set to screen. Cool. So we have our sky, and this is also being affected by our brightness and contrast. So it's actually really bright at the moment. I'm going to make this larger. Maybe I'll make this like nebula that we have follow this skyline of our trees. I think that looks really nice. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the opacity of this so it's not as bright, and make it like match my sky a bit more. Cool, that's looking really cool. And you can go ahead and add more and more images to this, textures, start to overlay things, add some masking layers. So what do I want to do next? Well, say I actually don't like how bright this is or the color. I can go ahead and add a brightness layer and have it above my background layer, my sky layer, but below my other two images. I can go ahead and maybe reduce the brightness on just my sky, and then maybe up the contrast on just my sky. You get the idea. So that's looking pretty good. Next thing, I think I'm going to add some specular to this. So one thing I like to do is if we go ahead and create another brightness layer, and this brightness layer I'm actually going to rename spec or specular, and I'm just going to up the brightness, say by 20, and then go into our masking layer and press Alt and click on it, and this is going to show my masking layer. I'm actually going to make this whole masking layer black. So grabbing my brush or my fill tool, I'm just going to fill it in black, completely black, and then come back out of this. Click anywhere to get out of it. And now I'm going to grab my brush, make it a white color this time, make my brush slightly smaller, and click on my masking layer. And then what I can do is paint in this brightness. So maybe I want like areas on the edges of these trees that are particularly bright. So I can go ahead and grab in the white color, start to paint some brighter areas on this. You can see it's just making these little areas slightly subtly bright. Maybe around the edge here as well. Maybe down the edge of this tree. Maybe down the edges of some of these trees over here. And it's quite subtle at the moment because I've not added much weight to it. And you see, if I go back into this brightness layer and up my brightness, you can see it's only adding it to the edges of these trees. And you make it quite subtle, just it's little points of specular. You can see the difference here. Obviously, you can take a lot more time to do this and make it a lot neater for yourself. So, what else don't I like about this? So, we have it kind of dropping off a cliff here. I originally thought this would be like a waterfall or something, so you'd see it go off the edge. But from this perspective, it just looks like it ends. So let's go ahead and do something about this. So maybe let's go and add some maybe like trees or mountains at the end. So I'm actually going to search for maybe, let's just search for landscape. And again, make sure you only search for large images. And let's have a look at what there is. So I think I could probably use some of these. Obviously, if you have stock images, go ahead and use stock images. I'm going to go ahead and grab this image here. This is first of all, this is a huge image. So this is going to be massive when I place it in. So placing my huge image into this, I'm going to go ahead and place it between some of these layers. So I'm going to put above my sky, but below my volumetric lighting. I might just like start to place in. See, I kind of like how this like goes off into a distance here. There's a bit of like a hill to it. Oh, these trees are quite nice. So I'm just going to place these in here. But obviously this needs color correcting. So first of all, I'm going to rasterize my layer. And I'm going to feather out some of the sections on it. So grabbing my eraser and making sure my eraser hardness is like 0, I can come in and start to erase some of this that I don't like the look of. So that's looking good. And then obviously this is absolutely the wrong color. So let's go ahead and add a color correction to this. So I'm going to grab my hue and saturation and make sure this is above this layer that we have here, but below my volumetric lighting again. And I'm just going to go ahead and change the hue on this. So we want it to match to like this blue color. I'm going to quickly turn off my sky because it's affecting my sky at the moment. I don't want to see it. So we're looking to match like this blue that we have here. And about there looks good. I think if we darken this, it'll look good. So I'm going to add a brightness and contrast into this as well, and I'm just going to reduce the brightness on this, and you can see now it's starting to match this landscape quite nicely. And obviously you can spend a lot more time doing this yourself, but now Matt, you're going to say to me, Matt, when I turn my sky back on, this is now affected by the layers that we just created, so we need to update our masking layers on this as well. So I'm going to select my masking layer here, and I'm going to grab a black color, and I'm like I did with the specular, I'm going to like reduce the colors here. I'm just going to like get rid of all these areas up here by painting the black on it. And same with my second layer, get this back to like a blue color. Cool, looking good. So 2 more things I'm probably going to do to this, and then I'm going to end this. I'm going to add a color drain. This is like staple for me. I do this like every time. So I'm going to drain the colors out the corners to make your eye draw into the middle a bit more. So to do this, I'm going to grab a circle. I'm going to make this circle the size of my canvas. And I'm going to rasterize it. And then making another layer and going back to my circle, I'm going to select the 4 corners, go into my new layer, grab my paintbrush, and we're going to paint this white. So these 4 corners are now white. You can go back and delete your circle, and then I'm going to overlay this by color. And this is going to pull the corners out, but of course we want to fade this out a bit. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and then just increase the blur on this corner. You can see it's starting to pull out a little bit. Let's go ahead and drain our 4 corners here. And I'm going to go and make this bigger because it's draining a bit too much. By making it bigger, you're basically making the corners smaller when I go ahead and center it back in the image. Cool. So let's just turn this off and on and see what's happening. You can see we've now pulled some of the color out of the corners here. Cool, looking good. We can also go ahead and probably add maybe a texture over the top of this. So one thing I like to do is add either a color or a texture that's going to bring everything together like a single color. So let me find my textures. I have like this cardboard texture here, like this warm like orange. I also like to overlay this on top and then dull it down because it's going to add some imperfections to it as well. So when you render a lot of stuff out in 3D, it has no imperfections, whereas you take a photo with a camera, there's always going to be a little grain or noise in it. So if I overlay this and then reduce my opacity, it's just going to warm it up a little bit and add some like slight imperfections. If I turn this off and on, you can see what it's doing. It's maybe a little strong, reduce it down a bit more. looking good. And again, I'm going to drop this below the color drain layer that I had here. I'm going to name this color drain. Cool. One final thing I might want to do to this is add maybe some blur at the front here. So let's go ahead and copy our original layer, so duplicate our original layer, and I'm going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur this. So this is blurring our image out. You can see it's now blurred, and I'm going to add a masking layer to this, so this like little, what looks like a Japanese flag. I'm going to add a masking layer to this. Alt and click on it to go into our masking layer, and again I'm going to black this whole thing out. Go back into my thing, select my masking layer, and then with a white brush that's had its hardness turned down again, you can just paint the areas back in that you want a blur. So if I paint it down here, it's going to add this blur into this corner here, maybe across this front here. And actually this is probably a little strong of a blur, but you get the process. Like I say, I'm just trying to skip through this reasonably quickly. Cool, this is looking pretty nice. One final thing we can do as well is add some darkness or highlights to this. So this is dodge or burn. What I like to do is duplicate my image again, and I'm going to hide the old one. So this is our new one here, and come up to this like little drop here, the one below it, sorry. There's dodge tool and burn tool. So burn makes things darker. If I go ahead and click here, you can see it's made it a little darker, and it's very subtle. Dodge makes things brighter, so I can add some highlights in here. You get the idea? Cool. So yeah, this is how I'd probably edit this image. Obviously you can take a lot more time to do this. I'm actually pretty happy with how it looks, me just rushing through this, but I'm going to go ahead and like tweak some things. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you made something cool. Feel free to join my Discord, remember, and post what you create. Any comments, ask me down below. Peace out.